Hello guys, this is Octavio, and I'm gonna talk about this iconic film called The Shawshank Redemption. The Shawshank Redemption is a movie based in the novella Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption, wrote by Stephen King. The film was directed by Frank Darabont and stars Tim Robbins and Morgan Freeman. The story revolves around Andy Dufresne, a banker who is sentenced to life in Shawshank State Penitentiary for the murder of his wife and her lover, despite proclaiming his innocence. Inside the prison, Andy befriends another inmate who is known as Red, and the two develop a strong bond. Despite facing harsh conditions and corruption in the prison system, Andy maintains his resilience and hope. He uses his financial expertise to assist the prison staff and fellow inmates, gaining privileges. As the years go by, Andy secretly works on a tunnel to escape Shawshank. His determination and patience eventually lead to his escape. The film explored themes such as friendship, hope, and the human ability to endure adversity. The Shawshank Redemption is celebrated for its powerful storytelling, memorable characters, and a twist ending that resonate with audiences. This being considered one of the best films of all times, with a score of 9.3 on IMDb. It's just behind the legendary film The Godfather, and this film has received multiple nominations and recognitions. The Part 1. Andy is sentenced to life. The Shawshank Redemption begins with Andy Dufresne, who is a banker, intelligent but cold character. He is sentenced for murdering his wife and her lover. Despite his claim for his innocence, he is the only suspect and finally is sentenced to life in Shawshank State Penitentiary. Inside the prison, Andy faces the harsh reality of prison life, where he encounters both the brutality of his fellow inmates and the corruption among the prison staff. Part 2. Andy meets Red. Red is the one who narrates Andy's story in this film. Red, at the time Andy entered prison, he had already been in prison for 20 years. He is known for getting anything in prison in exchange for cigarettes. Andy approached Red to ask for a small rock hammer, since the hobby of Andy was creating figures with rocks. Red warned him to hide the rock hammer well and not to try to hurt anyone because it could get him in trouble. The rock hammer is one of the most important things in this movie. Part 3. Andy was abused. When someone enters the prison, is very probably to get enemies, and Andy is not the exception. Andy got a job in the prison laundry, and one day a group of convicts called the Sisters, especially Doug's Diamond, tried to sexually abuse him, and he always defended himself. However, these abuses continued for around 2 years. Part 4. Andy gets the respect of his inmates and the prison staff. One day, while Andy, Red, and other inmates were working on the roof of the penitentiary, Andy heard about the financial problems of one of the cruelest police officers. The senior officer, who had received an inheritance, was not happy to pay the high taxes. Andy heard his situation, and wanted to help him, offering his help even though the police officer almost threw him off the roof. The police officer finally accepted Andy's help, and thanks to this favor, the police brought him and his cellmates beers. Andy didn't drink any beer, but he enjoyed seeing how the prisoners could feel free for a moment while they drank their beers. Because of this, he gained friends in prison and the support of the police. As a gift for the gesture, Red gave him a poster of an actress, and the police broke the legs of those men who abused him. Part 5. Andy gets a new job in prison. The prison warden knew about Andy's intelligence, and he offered him a move to work for the penitentiary library alongside Mr. Brooks, an old convict and smart man who had spent more than 50 years in prison. Andy at the library provided financial management to help many police officers and got new books for the inmates. The corrupt warden used the prisoners as slaves for different jobs, and he kept all the money. For this reason, he went to Andy so that he would be in charge of laundering his money under the name of a person who did not exist and being able to register his money in the bank. There was so much work in the library that Red began to work alongside Andy. Meanwhile, Mr. Brooks was released. Part 6. Institutionalized. When Mr. Brooks was released, he didn't want to leave the prison because he didn't know anything else. In prison, he was a well-respected adult man, and outside of prison, he would be just a poor old man who was worthless. Mr. Brooks sent a letter to Red, Andy, and the other inmates to tell them that everything outside is moving faster now. When he went to prison, he had only seen one vehicle in his life, and now the cars were everywhere. He was unable to find any meaning in his life outside of prison, so he had no choice but to commit suicide. In this part of the movie, Red mentioned the word institutionalized, which has a special meaning for those people who don't know anything else outside of those walls. Part 7. Andy's Legacy. Through several letters sent to the government, Andy was able to obtain funds to build a new library named Mr. Brooks. Up to this point in his life, he had spent almost 15 years in prison. Perhaps Andy inside prison was seeking redemption for what he had done wrong. He always looked after the well-being of his fellow prisoners, even helping them finish their primary education. When a man spends a lot of time in prison, he needs to keep his mind busy. In Andy's case, it was taking over a library and laundering the warden's money. Andy's new project was to teach a recently arrived young inmate called Tommy or Mr. Rock and Roll, who asked Andy to teach him how to read. Andy spent several months teaching him, and finally Tommy obtained his primary certificate. Part 8. Andy is about to get his freedom. In this part of the movie, we enter in the climax of the film. The young man, Tommy, had a lot of admiration for Andy. When a prisoner enters into trust with another, the latter confesses the reason why he came to prison. Tommy confessed to Andy that he was in prison with a maniac man called Elliot Blatch, who had confessed to Tommy that he had killed the wife of an important banker and her lover. When Andy heard this, he realized that he had a witness who could get him out of jail. So Andy went to the warden hoping for his support. However, the warden didn't believe him and the warden decided to send to Andy to the dungeon. The warden decided to destroy everything that Andy has built. The warden knew that if Andy got out of jail, he would no longer have anyone to launder his money. It was clear. The warden only looked out for his own interest, and he wouldn't mind leaving an innocent man in jail for the rest of his life. To prevent Andy from proving his innocence, the warden murdered Tommy, and this way Andy would have no witnesses to obtain his freedom. The last day. After spending 2 months in the dungeon, he was told about Tommy's death. This caused a huge depression for Andy as he lost a friend and almost lost his hope for freedom. Andy last spoke with Red was about his dream of building a boat and a hotel in Susantanejo, and he asked Red for one last favor to pick up a letter hidden under some stone in a small town when Red got his freedom. Andy told to Red the phrase, "I hope the road is long." This line is significant because it symbolizes Andy's new life and hope outside of prison. That same afternoon, Andy requests a rope, raising suspicions among the other inmates to end his life with that rope. At night, Andy decides to return to work with the warden. When the warden leaves the prison, Andy decides to steal his suit. The next morning, while the police were counting the prisoners, they realized that only Andy was missing. His fellow inmates thought the worst. When the warden enters Andy's cell, he didn't know how Andy had disappeared until they realized that behind the poster of the woman that Red had given Andy years ago, there was a tunnel in the wall that had been filled for many years. Part 10. The Escape. Andy used the small rock hammer to dig that tunnel for almost 20 years until he reached some pipes that he had to enter. Those pipes ended up in a river outside the prison, while the rope held a suitcase to his leg that carried the warden's suite and the documents of that fictitious person with whom they laundered the money. The police looked everywhere for Andy but couldn't find him. Andy took a new identity, posing as the person who deposited the laundered money into the bank. Andy had always signed all the documents, and the members of the bank did not have doubt about he was the legitimate owner of that money. After that, under his new identity, a part of the money went with him to Mexico, and the rest was used to accuse the warden of fraud. The warden had no escape, and as the police came for him to imprison him, he decided to shoot himself in the head. Part 11. Red was released. It had been 5 years after Andy's escape. Red commented that Andy's story was still heard in prison. When Red served 40 years of his sentence, he was released. He tried to adapt to his new life, but he couldn't reconcile his new reality. He was institutionalized, just like Mr. Brooks. He even thought about committing a crime to return to prison. Red couldn't get back a life that he had never had. Then he remembered the promise that he had made to Andy to look for a letter under some stones that were in a small town. So he went to that place, and upon finding that letter, he discovered that Andy had put that letter days after his escape with an envelope of money so that Red could go to Susantanejo to help Andy to build his dreams. The film ends with this scene of the reunion of two great friends on the coast of Pacific Ocean who obtained their redemption after having spent many years in prison.